Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Isanzure Universe. We reveal a long-hidden truth and a historical injustice. Agatha Habyarimana, widow of Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana, has been officially cleared of all accusations related to the 1994 genocide. For decades, she was wrongly accused, demonized by propaganda, and denied justice. Today, we explore her story, the historical context, and the ongoing implications for Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Today, we return to a long-hidden truth and a historical injustice. Agatha Habyarimana, the widow of Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana, has just been found not guilty but as the victim of a terrorist attack that shook the entire Great Lakes region of Africa. For decades, she was wrongly accused of participating in the 1994 genocide. However, the French justice system has just ordered a dismissal, confirming that no serious charges could be brought against her. This verdict should prompt us to reflect on the fate of the innocent people unjustly demonized and on the responsibility of the Paul Kagame regime and the RPF in Katani, who are still committing atrocious crimes against the Congolese people today. This story is not only that of Agatha Habyarimana, but that of thousands of Rwandans silenced by official propaganda and who also deserve justice and reparation. The story of Agatha Habyarimana cannot be understood without recalling the tragic night of April 6, 1994. That day, President Juvenal Habyarimana's plane was shot down over Kigali by a missile, instantly killing the head of state, his Burundian counterpart Cyprien Ntaryamira, and several members of their delegation. This attack not only cost the life of a president, it triggered a spiral of violence that would lead to one of the greatest human tragedies of the 20th century. But what history has often forgotten is that Agatha Habyarimana was from that moment on a widow, a bereaved sister, a woman deprived of direction and a future. And yet, instead of being recognized as a victim, she was designated guilty by RPF propaganda and Kagame's networks. For more than 30 years, her name was associated with the notion of a kazu, the alleged circle of people close to her husband accused of having prepared the genocide. Yet, no solid evidence has ever demonstrated her involvement. The recent decision by the investigating judges in France puts an end to this unjust accusation. There is no sufficient evidence to link her to any participation or complicity in the genocide. This verdict is crucial because it reminds us that an accusation relayed by propaganda and certain Western networks cannot replace judicial truth. Agatha Habyarimana is therefore a double victim, first of the murder of her husband and loved ones in a terrorist attack, and then of a global campaign of unfounded accusations that tarnished her name and destroyed her life. This injustice must be repaired. She deserves compensation for the suffering she has endured, because there is nothing more cruel than being deprived of her family and at the same time being transformed into an imaginary criminal to cover up for the real perpetrators of the crime. However, we now know that everything points to the responsibility of Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front in the attack of April 6, 1994. But what Kagame and his allies did to Agatha Habyarimana is exactly what his regime continues to do in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the name of a rhetoric of security and the fight against rebels, Kigali has justified a series of aggressions and military occupations in eastern Congo. Like Agatha Habyarimana, millions of innocent Congolese are now being targeted as accomplices of so-called armed groups simply because they live in areas rich in minerals coveted by Rwanda and its sponsors. The parallel is chilling. The victims are blamed to better mask the crimes of the real executioners. The international community has turned a blind eye to Kagame's methods for decades. It swallowed his version of history, in which any dissenting voice was accused of genocidal ideology. But today, as revelations multiply, it is becoming clear that this strategy cannot last forever. The Agatha Habyarimana affair is a warning. the truth always emerges. And if the RPF Inkatani regime persists in its logic of terror, manipulation, and massacre in the DRC, it will sooner or later meet the same fate. Agatha Habyarimana is not an isolated case. Thousands of Rwandans in exile, some living in Europe, America, or Africa, are suffering the same fate, accused of genocide without trial and deprived of papers protecting their fundamental rights. This collective criminalization is a formidable political weapon, but it is contrary to the universal principles of justice. Everyone has the right to a fair trial, a dignified defense, and the presumption of innocence. However, Kagame and his system preferred to judge them in public opinion and condemn them to eternal exile. It is time to set the record straight. It is time to say loud and clear that Agatha Habyarimana and others like them deserve reparation and dignity. Not only because they were unjustly accused, but also because their story reveals the brutal mechanism by which the RPF regime built its legitimacy by reversing roles, transforming the victims into the culprits, and setting itself up as savior when it was itself the main instigator of the tragedy. This is a lesson for the Congolese people today. Those who are destroying Goma, Masisi, Rutshuru, and Uvira want to impose the same logic, kill, accuse others, and then present themselves as victims or mediators. But the Congolese must know that the truth never dies. Kagame can still manipulate certain media outlets, he can still buy diplomatic support, but sooner or later he will have to answer, as he already fears, for crimes against humanity committed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Agatha Habyarimana, through her career, embodies the voice of all those innocent people accused unjustly. The French justice system has begun to recognize this reality. It is now up to African peoples, intellectuals, activists, but also honest international bodies to continue this work of truth and reparation. Because this fight goes beyond one person. It concerns the future of justice and peace throughout the Great Lakes region. The attack of April 6, 1994, remains the central enigma of the Rwandan tragedy. For 30 years, official versions have conflicted, but the most solid facts point directly to Paul Kagame's Rwandan Patriotic Front. Testimonies from former RPF officers, investigations conducted by French judges such as Jean-Louis Bruguière, and revelations from independent researchers indicate that the missiles that brought down the presidential plane were fired from an area controlled by the RPF. The objective was clear: to eliminate Juvenal Habyarimana and provoke chaos that would justify the seizure of power by force. This cynical plan succeeded, but at the cost of a bloodbath for which Rwandans and Congolese continue to pay the price. In this context, Agatha Habyarimana became the first political victim. Not only did she lose her husband and several close relatives, but she also became the target of the new regime's propaganda machine. The RPF, aware of the need to justify its newly acquired power, absolutely had to create a manic narrative. On one side, the saviors embodied by Kagame. On the other, the planners of the genocide, referred to by their entourage as the Akazu. Thus, Agatha Habyarimana was transformed into the ideal culprit despite the total absence of evidence. This propaganda strategy was relayed indiscriminately by numerous Western media outlets. For years, her name was systematically associated with accusations of genocide. Few media outlets took the time to point out that no international tribunal, neither the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, nor the French justice system, ever proved her involvement. On the contrary, judicial harassment against her often relied on political pressure exerted by Kigali and its diplomatic networks. It was only recently, after decades of suspicion, that the French justice system finally ruled, no case to answer. This verdict is more than a personal victory for Agatha Habyarimana. It is a slap in the face to the RPF's propaganda and a sign that times are changing. While many other people accused of genocide by the Kagame regime were also victims of political lies, Hundreds, if not thousands, of Rwandans around the world have lived for 30 years under this infamous label, unable to work, travel, or even rebuild their family lives. This collective criminalization is an injustice that must be forcefully denounced. Historical parallels abound. We remember the dark periods when entire peoples were designated as collective culprits without individual trial. Germans after World War II, Japanese interned in the United States, or certain African peoples who were victims of punitive colonization. Each time, the lesson is the same: accused en bloc without evidence or a fair trial. It is a destructive political weapon that brings neither justice nor reconciliation. Today's Rwanda under Kagame repeats this mistake by brandishing the accusation of genocide at every turn to ground its opponents in Rwanda and abroad. But the case of Agatha Habyarimana takes on an even more symbolic dimension when linked to the current crimes committed in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Since 1996, the Rwandan army and its proxies like the M23 have been sowing death in eastern Congo. Reports from the UN, international NGOs, and independent researchers document massacres of civilians, mass rapes, and the looting of resources. Yet Kigali continues to reverse the roles. It accuses the Congolese of complicity with rebel groups and justifies its invasions by presenting itself as a victim of insecurity it itself created. This is exactly the same mechanism that transformed Agatha Habyarimana, a widow, into an accomplice in genocide. This mechanism of manipulation must be broken. The Congolese must understand that what happened to Agatha Habyarimana is not just a personal story, it is a political method. Kagame and his regime are creating scapegoat loops to divert attention from their own crime. In the same way that Agatha was accused of covering up the April 6, 1994 attack, the Congolese are now accused of threatening Rwanda's security to cover up organized looting in Kivu. It is therefore imperative to demand justice for Agatha Habyarimana, not only out of respect for her dignity, but also to show that no amount of propaganda can erase the truth. She must be compensated for the decades of slander she has endured, for the deaths of her husband and loved ones, and for the forced exile that deprived her of a normal life. This reparation would also send a clear message to Kagame: lies do not protect forever. The Congolese, for their part, must learn a direct lesson. If Agatha Habyarimana is not guilty, then the world will eventually recognize that the Congolese massacred by the RDF and the M23 are the real victims. The RPF regime will not be able to hide forever behind fabricated narratives of regional security or the fight against genocidaires. In truth, Kagame has built his power on systematic role reversal. These crimes are disguised as acts of self-defense. Opponents are presented as extremists. Victims are transformed into executioners. But recent history shows that this logic always ends up collapsing. Dictators who manipulate the truth are eventually caught. This was the case with Pinochet in Chile, Milosevic in Serbia, or more recently, Blaise Compaoré in Burkina Faso. Kagame's Rwanda will not escape this rule. Agatha Habyarimana's fight is therefore also that of the future. Justice is not a propaganda tool, but a universal principle. Bringing justice to this woman means bringing justice to all Rwandans wrongly accused. And it also prepares the ground for the Congolese to obtain reparations for the millions of deaths, displacement, and trauma caused by Rwanda's military interventions. This is why we must insist: Agatha Habyarimana is not alone. She represents a multitude of innocent people crushed by the RPF's machine of lies. And what happened to her yesterday is what is happening today to entire families in North Kivu, in Itavu. The Congolese must never forget that international justice has begun to crack Kigali's propaganda wall. Their fight for the truth is therefore legitimate and will ultimately triumph. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, established in Arusha by the United Nations in 1994, was tasked with trying those most responsible for the genocide. But its limitations quickly became apparent. First, the ICTR focused exclusively on crimes committed by government forces or the Interahamwe militias, almost completely neglecting to investigate crimes committed by the RPF. Yet, damning testimonies and independent investigations have shown that the RPF massacred thousands of Hutu civilians during its military advance towards Kigali and continued to kill in refugee camps in Congo. But no serious indictments have been brought against Kagame or his close associates. This imbalance has helped to consolidate the official narrative imposed by Kigali, that of a regime that had saved Rwanda and whose crimes were secondary or excusable. It is in this context that people like Agatha Habyarimana were used as a symbol of evil to be overcome, even though international justice had never been able to establish their guilt. In reality, the ICTR was one of the tools of a biased diplomacy shaped by the major powers interested in supporting Kagame as a regional ally. International diplomacy largely contributed to maintaining this one-sided version of history. From the end of the genocide, Kagame was able to present himself as the strong man of a resurgent Rwanda, modernized, disciplined, and useful to Western interests. These lobbying networks worked tirelessly to demonize anyone who dared to criticize his regime. Thus, genocidal ideology became a political weapon. It was enough to accuse an opponent of harboring this ideology to silence them. Agatha Habyarimana, an emblematic figure of the former regime, was a perfect target. France, itself under pressure, opened investigations that never led to concrete evidence but prolonged suspicion for decades. Even today, this diplomatic manipulation continues. Many European and African countries hesitate to criticize Kigali for fear of being accused of complacency toward the genocidaires. However, more and more voices are being raised to denounce this hypocrisy. Journalists, researchers, NGOs, and even political leaders are beginning to break the wall of silence. The Agatha Habyarimana affair is part of this context. She proves that even after 30 years of lies, the truth can resurface if we dare to seek it. But Agatha Habyarimana is not alone. Throughout the Rwandan diaspora, thousands of men and women are suffering. This unjust criminalization continues. Many arrived in Europe or America as refugees, but were hit by refusals of naturalization or by smear campaigns simply because they were close to or associated with the former regime. Some have lived for 30 years with the constant fear of arrest, extradition, or public humiliation. Entire families have been separated, careers shattered. This silent suffering is rarely mentioned in the media, but it exists and must be acknowledged. Take the example of some former Rwandan civil servants or soldiers who took refuge in Europe. Many of them were accused by Kigali of imaginary crimes simply to remove them from the political scene. Many won their cases due to lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. Reputations destroyed, social lives annihilated. These cases are a tragic reminder of what Agatha Habyarimana experienced. The long pain of innocence tarnished, the invisible torture of being considered guilty without being so. Looking towards the Democratic Republic of Congo, one can note that the same logic is applied on a large scale. Millions of innocent Congolese, massacred or displaced by the wars waged by Rwanda and its proxies, are not considered victims, but collateral damage or even accomplices of rebel groups. UN reports speak of more than 6 million deaths since 1996 in eastern Congo, a staggering figure that far exceeds that of the Rwandan genocide. Yet this tragedy does not receive the same media or judicial treatment. The parallel is clear. What was done to Agatha Habyarimana is today being reproduced on the scale of an entire people. Blaming the victims, hiding the crimes, reversing roles, that is the hallmark of the Kagame regime. But the recent story of Agatha Habyarimana proves that this strategy cannot last forever. Justice, even slow, always ends up shaking the imposed narratives. If Agatha Habyarimana was able to obtain a dismissal after years of relentless efforts, then the Congolese can hope that one day the crimes committed by Kagame in the DRC will be recognized and punished. The conclusion of this analysis must be a solemn appeal, first to Kagame and his regime. What you did to Agatha Habyarimana, what you did to the Rwandan refugees, what you are doing today to the Congolese, all of this will eventually come back to haunt you. History never protects criminals forever. You can manipulate, intimidate, buy support, but you will not erase the facts. The mass crimes you are committing in Kivu will not go unpunished. Next, an appeal to the Congolese. Remember the story of Agatha Habyarimana. Remember that she was wrongly accused, smeared, persecuted, but in the end, the truth began to triumph. What happened to this woman is proof that patience, perseverance, and the pursuit of justice bear fruit. Never give up your fight. The truth about your suffering will come to light, and the guilty parties will be brought to justice. Whoever they are, they will one day be held accountable. Finally, an appeal to Africa and the world. Do not let a regime's propaganda dictate collective memory. Justice cannot be one-sided. It cannot condemn some and absolve others for political reasons. It must be universal, balanced, and evidence-based. The case of Agatha Habyarimana is an opportunity to recall this fundamental principle. Human dignity is not negotiable. It must be defended. Agatha Habyarimana must be compensated as a symbol of justice restored. The innocent Rwandans accused unjustly must be rehabilitated. And above all, the Congolese victims of the current barbarity must obtain reparations. It is in this way and only in this way that the Great Lakes region of Africa will one day be able to turn the page on the tragedies imposed by the ambitions of one man and his regime. Because ultimately the lesson is simple. The truth can be delayed but never erased. What Kagame imposed on Agatha Habyarimana yesterday will be imposed on him tomorrow by history. What he does to the Congolese today will be held against him tomorrow. And in this fight, it is up to the people to never give in, to never believe fabricated stories, but to courageously defend the memory of their dead and the dignity of their living. History has many layers, but only truth can bring real justice. Agatha Habyarimana's story reminds us that silence protects the powerful, while truth empowers the victims. At Isanzure Universe, we continue to ask the hard questions, challenge the official narratives, and uncover the realities others want buried. The struggle for justice is not over. This is only the beginning. Like, comment, and subscribe to get more as we continue digging for facts,